It's good day to brew, baby. What is up, YouTube? It's your boy Millsy. Back with Hometown Commander, back for another episode of Millsy Brews, the show where I take my first pass at the commander in front of us on my quest to brew the magic world. You know the motto, baby. It's ABB, always be brewing, and that's what we're back to do today. That deck list is going to be down in the description for you below, as well as I'd really appreciate it if you could interact with the video, like, comment, subscribe, consider checking out all those links in the description. I'd appreciate it. But today, we're rolling through, catching up on some older commanders, and today we're going to talk about Sophia, Dogged Detective. A 4-mana Bant human detective that says whenever she comes in, we're going to make Tiny, a legendary 2/2 green dog detective creature token with trample. We can pay 1 and sack an artifact token to put a counter on each dog we control, and whenever a dog hits one of our opponents in combat, we get to make a food and then investigate, so we're going to make a clue as well. Sophia, of course, was the alternate commander from that Morska Clues deck that came out in Murder's Karlov Manor, but I think Sophia's really interesting. When a dog hits you, making a food and a clue, so you're going to have plenty of artifact tokens to grow our dogs with counters, and I think that's basically our goal, right? Get some dogs in, get counters on them, pay off counters being on them, and then we can pay off ways to make other dog tokens. Again, we can't make more than one of Tiny unless we find a way to get it to be on Legendary, which I'm not as worried about. I think we're really just going to care about all these artifact tokens we can make and have a good time. But I want to say a quick thank you to the channel members. Thank you so much for supporting the channel. And if you're interested in seeing our videos a little bit early for just $1 a month, consider checking it out down below. The truth is there's a lot of dogs that we have access to, and the amount of dogs has grown. Remember that a few years back, Wizards changed all hounds into dogs, so that increased the amount of things we have in our typings. Remember, we also have all those shapeshifters as well. But we do have some interesting choices. Enoch Bonkin is one of those creatures from Tarkir that gives all your creatures with a counter on it a certain ability, since that's the point of our deck, right? Very useful for us, handing out first strike. District Mascot comes in with a counter on it. Whenever it attacks while saddled, you can put another counter on it, and then you can remove counters to take out a key artifact. Don't mind that at all. Again, it's another cheap dog we can get in. Faithful Watchdog has Vigilance, comes in with 3 counters on it. Floodhound's an interesting one, allowing it to tap for 3 to investigate, to make a clue. I think this is an interesting ability. At first, I really wasn't sure if it would be viable, but I think it's a fair point. You know, sometimes you may need just one of those tokens to grow the board, and so Floodhound can help you do that, right? Get another clue on board to have more access to things. Generous Pup. It's probably one of the best dogs in the deck. Whenever you put one or more counters on, whenever you put one or more counters on it, you put a counter on each other creature you control, and this only goes off once per turn. This is really great because then if we have the ability to use Sophia on everyone's turn, we can just get more counters that way. But this means that the rest of your board of dogs is just growing, right? Becoming better and better. Canine can give a creature unblockable, legendary creature unblockable, which is fun, works great for Tiny or any of the other legendary dogs we have around. And while Canine's untapped, it gives all of our legendary creatures Ward 1, which is really nice, right, to protect Sophia as well. Longshot Squad, another one of those Tarkir cards, again, hasn't been printed with dog on it, but does have hound on it, so it's still a dog, giving all of our creatures counters on them reach. Metallic Mimic puts a counter on each other dog as they come in, nice ability. Mirror Entity, of course, Shapeshifter with Changeling, so every creature type. And has a great ability for X mana to turn all of our creatures into a base power and toughness XX until end of turn, really taking advantage of those counters, right? If we want to make them into a nice base power and toughness and then use those counters to make them even bigger. Mowu is a lovely looking 4 mana 3/3 with Vigilance and Trample. If you put one more counters on it, you put that many +1 on it instead. And having Trample makes it a nice threat to our opponents. Mushroom Watchdogs is another way for us to get rid of those food tokens if we don't want to do it into Sophia. Watchdogs can get a counter on itself by sacrificing a food. Only at sorcery speed, but it gains Vigilance in turn, which is kind of interesting. You know, if you have ways to care about when tokens leave the battlefield or things like that, Watchdogs can really help with that. And it can grow itself, which is never a bad thing. Pack Leader gives all our dogs a buff, and then whenever it attacks, prevent all combat damage to be dealt to dogs you control. This is a huge ability, allowing us to attack and not have to worry about getting blocked or, you know, have our dogs die in combat, right? Resolute Watchdog and Selfless Savior can both sacrifice themselves to give a key creature indestructible. These are the kind of abilities we love because they can protect the right creature at the right time. Resolute does cost 1 mana, whereas Selfless Savior is free, but either way, very useful abilities when we need them. Tanuki Transplanter is a really interesting card, and I think it's something that's going to work really well with Sophia. So it says whenever it or the equipped creature attacks, you add amount of green mana equal to its power, and you don't lose it as steps and phases end. You will still lose. You'll still lose it at the end of turn. But this is interesting because whether Tanuki attacks itself or it's equipped to something else, you could get enough mana to really go deep on Sophia's ability, right? Sacrificing those artifacts, spreading counters around. I think this just works really nice with what we're trying to do in the grand scheme of things. Traveling Botanist for 2 mana says whenever it becomes tapped, you could look at the top card of your library. If it's a land, you could be able to put it into your hand. If you don't put the card in your hand, you can put it in your graveyard. So you're basically surveilling one, right? More or less. The only difference is instead of going back on top, it'll go back on top, right? But if it's a land, it comes into your hand. I just like this idea. This is enough value that I think is worth it. And as a 2 mana 2/3, it's got a nice body for us to start growing on top of. Of course, we got to play Yoshimaru, getting a counter on it whenever another legendary permanent comes in. Release the dogs, can make a bunch of dog tokens. Again, even great in a deck like this when we can then immediately start growing those 1/1s. 4/1s for 4 mana is a very good cost. This is a great cost for making these tokens. And then, of course, we can immediately start growing on top of them. Maskwood Nexus and Arcane Adaptation can turn all of our creatures into dogs. This is really useful, mainly so that those counters can go on everything. We're not playing a lot of non-dog creatures. I mean, Sophia is one of the really only non-dog creatures in the deck, but it's important that even she can grow as well. Maskwood Nexus can also be paid. You pay 3 mana to start making 2/2 tokens that are also going to be dogs on the battlefield, right? Taking advantage of that. Patchwork Banner can buff all of our dogs, and it taps for random any color, which is pretty darn cool as well. But I think what we're going to try to do, probably to set ourselves apart here, is try to tap in, take advantage of this counters matters type stuff, right? Damning Verdict, destroying all creatures with no counters on them. Wave Goodbye, bouncing each creature with no counter on it. Synchronized Charge distributes some counters and gives all of our creatures with counters on them Vigilance and Trample. And the best part is it has that harmonized mechanic from Target Hero Dragonstorm, where we can then play it back out of our graveyard, kind of like Flashback, but for its harmonized cause. Meaning that we can get 2 nice alpha strikes as long as we got counters on all of our creatures. Mutational Advantage and Ripples of Potential provide some protection. Mutational Advantage gives all of our permanents with counters on them hexproof and indestructible and then proliferates, whereas Ripples proliferates and then phases all of our counters, our permanents that got counters on them out. Both great ways to protect our board and still get more counters on our things. And then Broker's Ascendancy, just going to put a counter on each of our creatures at the beginning of our end step. Great ability, right? To start spreading that love and growing our whole board at once. Hardened Scales, right? Adding an additional counter every time a counter would go on a creature we control. Sphere Grid puts a counter on a creature whenever it hits an opponent, but the key thing is its bottom ability, giving all of our creatures with counters on them Reach and Trample. So that's great because then they can block, and block really effectively with Reach, right? I think one of our biggest weaknesses, right, is creatures with flying, right? And so we kind of get that protection in Sphere Grid. And then Virtual Loyalty, spreading a counter on each creature we control on our end step, but it also untaps them, which is really nice. So we can get that nice attack in and grow and untap on the end step. But also I think we want to think about making tokens, right? So we're making food and clue tokens off the Investigate, right? Every time one of our dogs hit a player. So we can take advantage of this in ways like Adrix and Nev, doubling up the amount of tokens we would make. Academy Manufacturer, anytime we would make a clue, food, or treasure, we make one of each instead, which is going to lead to a nice pile of tokens off of Sophia's ability. Lotus is an interesting card. Whenever one or more counters are put on Lotus, you investigate that many times. Whenever you sacrifice a clue, you can put a counter on another creature you control. This has some wonky combos that you can do with some different creatures, but just pretty useful to start spreading more counters out, especially if we're using clues, right, for Sophia's ability. Then, right, we can start spreading counters out to our creatures. Peregrine Took says whenever we'd make a token, we'd make that token, those tokens plus an additional food, and we could sacrifice foods to draw cards. Again, very useful to dig through the deck if need be, since we should hopefully have a lot of them running around. And then we have a couple creatures that can help pass out counters whenever tokens come in. Rosie just says whenever you make a token in general, you get to put a counter on a creature other than Rosie. And Yoshin Dissonance says whenever an artifact comes into our control, you put a counter on a creature you control. So making those food, making those clues, we're going to start passing counters out and really just starting to grow, right, the rate at which we're buffing our creatures. Rosie is a fun combo with Lonus, making you a ton of clues if you want to do that, spreading out a ton of love to other things. Nuka-Cola vending machine. Anytime we sack a food, we make a tap treasure. Again, really useful since Sophia's making us foods, right? That means anytime we're using her ability, hopefully we can be making treasures too. More mana for future turns. Tamio's journal investigates at the start of our upkeep, makes us a clue. And you can sack 3 clues to go get any card and put it into your hand. Again, useful since we're hopefully going to be making multiple clues per turn. Using it, getting those clues, getting that key things into our hand and help us, finish out the game. Knights of Sweet Revenge lets all of our foods tap for a green mana, which is pretty cool. And then for 7 mana, we can get rid of it and give all of our creatures +X on the turn, where X is the number of foods we control. I like the idea that the foods could literally help pay for Sweet Revenge's sacrifice, right? And just go for a big attack that turn. But I've said it before on the show, and I'll say it again. No deck's ever complete. This is my first pass at Sophia, and I think going into testing, my gut tells me we need more of these Alpha Strikey kite cards, Overwhelming Stampede, Overrun, Triumph for the Hordes to help us better finish the game. But that's the hope with some of these cards, just to help us spread out counters, is hopefully we can get our creatures bigger so that we don't necessarily need to rely on that. I couldn't work out of Oblivion into the spot I wanted it to draw some cards each turn. I think we hopefully we'll have enough with the clues and things like that, but it makes sense, right? We're making tokens every turn, hopefully, so out of Oblivion should be able to draw us a card every turn. And then I love the idea of something like World Walker Helm. Whenever you'd make one or more artifact tokens, you make those tokens plus an additional map. Remember, the maps can be used to explore, or they're just great fodder for Sophia. Again, all 3 of these cards I feel like could just pretty much immediately come in. I was just these were the last 3 cards I cut. They were that good. I just was trying to decide between other things, but I think all 3 of them make a ton of sense to me. But let's do what we love to do on the channel the most and get into our playtest. Remember, the goal of playtest on our channel is not to find Magical Christmas Land. It's not just to show off all our best plays, but it's to get in some gameplay scenarios and kind of understand what we're looking to keep in our hands and how we're going to set up our board. So here we're looking at a 3-lander with that Aenoch, a Bondkind. There's Mutational Advantage. We see Ophelia, a dog that whenever it attacks can blink another creature, and a 4-lander. So, of course, great, right? We've got all of our mana for Sophia, so that's pretty great. We'll put the tap line in to start, and I think you go right in the Aenoch, right? Turn 3, I mean, there's a lot of arguments. I love the idea of ramping to get more down later. Since we're pretty much going to go into Feldia next turn, we're going to go into Sophia next turn. So I kind of like the idea of just getting some value there. I just realized we played the Flood Farm Verge. So attack with the Aenoch. Aenoch can't outlast this turn, right? Because we just don't have enough mana. Oh, the Reliquary Tower is great, especially if we're going to crack the clues to draw cards, right? Or we use them that way. Here we go. We come in, we make Tiny. If we can manage to attack with Aenoch Bondkin, that's great. I don't expect to be able to, but if we could, we'd net a food and a clue, but I'm not going to assume that we'll be able to. Got to bring that Plains in before that Sun Petal just to get, but we got 6 mana this turn. Unbreakable's fun. Could put a counter each of our creatures, give them Vigilance. Might mean a couple good attacks here, right? Because it'll be Trample on Tiny and then First Strike on all of our creatures because of the Bondkin. That seems like not a bad place to start. The question is, do we put down something like Peregrine Took and try to take advantage of getting all the tokens? Remember that Sophia makes a food and a clue for each dog that hits an opponent. So, Peregrine could be interesting, netting us a bunch of foods, but kind of like the idea of keeping up the mutational advantage just to protect our board. So remember, counter on all of them, Vigilance because of this until end of turn. And then they attack. I would assume at minimum Tiny is going to get us something. But maybe there's a world where, Bondkin gets in 2. But let's just simulate that it was just Tiny that got in, this turn for some damage, getting the food, getting the clue. I could immediately sack one if I want to put a counter. But I think, like I said, I'd rather keep up the mutational advantage. Just keep ourselves safe. Note that we can do that at instant speed. So if it does get back around to our turn and we didn't have to use the thing at all, I think I would consider cracking the food to put a counter on these guys and then just cracking the clue to draw a card. Just get some more things into our hand, kind of keep digging. Now with 7 mana, Philia could be interesting. Canine could be great, right? Giving Tiny basically the ability to be unblocked, right, is huge. Again, it plus Took, because now, right, we're keeping that 3 mana up for mutational advantage. Get in and attack again. Tiny should be able to, at least at minimum, do damage. So that would basically get us 2 foods and then a clue and a food, right? Because those are separate triggers. Making the food token is separate from investigating, so we should get all of that. That would lead to some card draw with Peregrine if we want to. But again, same position. Hold up, right? Hold up the mutational advantage. We can hopefully protect a couple of our things. The only downside of the mutational advantage is now it can't protect Canine or Peregrine Took, but that's okay. We could still manage some things well. Now, if it comes back to our turn and nobody's done anything, we got a couple options. We could go deep on putting counters. We could flash Felia in and use, Sophia's ability getting rid of one of the foods. We could draw with Peregrine Took, right? There's a lot of options here of what our line is. I think if nobody's gonna attack me, I kind of like the idea of flashing Felia in and then sacking one of the foods to Sophia to just spread counters around. All of our dogs are gonna get a counter. So that's pretty great. Like, get the Canopy Vista in untapped. Big 8 mana. I love the idea of something like Patchwork just to buff them up. So now we got 6 mana to work with. Philia could bounce it's a non-land permanent and then bring it back in, which is interesting. I guess it could be a lot of different things. This is really useful, I think, for Sophia. If somebody gets rid of Tiny, you could blink Sophia, right, and get another Tiny. Others, I think we're just attacking here. I think we're going to get some good value here on these guys attacking. We could tap down K9 to guarantee the damage if we want to. I don't know that we need to. I think a 5/5 is still going to be a pretty nice attacker here. So that's probably what? At least one creature hitting. If not, maybe the Bonkin too. But we'll say it's just Tiny that hits, even though I think it's going to end up being more than that. Right? Because Sophia's attacking, although it's not a dog. And then Canine could still attack, but we might want to leave it untapped just to, leave up the ward 1. Now we have enough to draw off of Peregrine, and again, we've left up mana for mutational. I think we're just in good shape. Again, if it comes back to our turn, we start cracking mana off of Sophia to do the fact that we can do this at instant speed, I think, is the thing to me that makes this really good. Because you can hold up the clues, you can hold up mana. People might think things are in your hand. You can actually sack the foods to gain life, and there's so much we can do. And if we had something that cared more about foods, like if we'd seen that Nuka Cola, this would be perfect, right? Nuka Cola also just kind of goes bonkers with Peregrine Took and making a bunch of value as well. But let's get into playtest number 2 here. Keeping a 4-lander with an offer you can't refuse. We see Virtue there for the counters, and then Tanuki Transplanter. So I like this. Got access to some good stuff. That Spire of Industry needs a artifact to be down to get its mana, so we can't exactly go right into Unsettled Mariner. It's a changeling, so it's every creature type, and basically whenever one of our permanents would be targeted by something, it's got ward 1, which is pretty fun. There's the Deserted Beast, so there's the mana for there, but I think I like the Mirrored Entity. Now we can go Sophia, make Tiny. I don't think there's a world where Mirror Entity gets in this turn, but it is there. Now we can get the Mariner in. We could also just get something like Virtual Loyalty in and just, be in good shape for our next turn. Maybe there's a world where Tiny hits in this turn. I doubt it. But if not, I kind of like the idea of now we have that. That was great and unlocked the Damning Verdict, right? Requisition Raid can put counters on everything and destroy something if need be. I love the idea of trying to get the Transplanter down. Again, it can attack, and it also can't refigure this turn. We just don't have enough mana, but it's a great piece in the future that's going to net us enough mana to really start sacrificing Sophia's things. I think you hold up the offer at this point, right? Go to combat. Maybe we can get Fox. Let's just say we can get Tiny in somewhere, get the food, get the clue. And then on end step, getting a counter for all of our creatures. Again, I like that on a future turn, Mirror Entity can make all of our creatures even bigger, right? To make those counters really take advantage. The nice thing about the transplanter is it can do its ability on it attacking. It doesn't have to be equipped. It's just if it's equipped to something like Tiny, right, we would get even more mana, right, off of its ability. But the intention here was to leave up mana for the time for the offer, but we also have an extra mana, so we could just try to like sack one of these clues to get a counter on each of our dogs again before our turn if nobody does anything, right? Just to continue to grow them up, get that party going. There's Nuka Cola, again, great for when we sacrifice those foods. 6 mana. Deming Verdict could be pretty fun. Just wipe the board, get a bunch of foods this turn, right? Because if you think about it, struck probably everyone's going to be wiped. Everyone's creature is going to be wiped out here. That leaves us with 1 mana. Remember, now we have 3 dogs that are basically guaranteed to hit this turn, right? So that's 3 foods, 3 clues. Tanuki's going to make on attack, it would try to make green mana. What we could do here is we could sacrifice Sophia in response to basically just sack the food we had before to put a counter on each dog we control, just so that way when this goes off, we're adding 5 green from Tanuki instead of 4. And like I said, then we're guaranteed that damage in. And then I think I would just, 5 mana. My gut tells me you just go deep on cracking these to put the counters. You could also start drawing off the clues if we wanted to. If we were more worried about just getting more pieces into hand. Maybe you crack a clue to start just to see what you get. Okay, well, there's a land we could play, right? So now you have the blue mana up for something like an offer you can't refuse. That makes me more willing to continue to crack. I'll crack one more clue, and then we'll crack a clue to Sophia with that last mana. And now, right, we're in good shape. We've got good things on board. We've got protection in the offer. We untap next turn. We have requisition ready. We have the Nuka Cola to put down to sack these foods to make treasures. And I think, again, we're just in a good spot. Again, weak potentially to some removal, but that's why we try to hold up something like an offer, right, to just protect our board. Let's get into playtest number 3 here. Keeping a 3-lander, Wave Goodbye, Garrick's Uprising. There's the requisition rate, and then Rosy Cotton. Again, Rosy Cotton's so good with Sophia, right? Because Sophia's making all those counters when our dogs hit, right? And so we're just gaining so much value off the dogs, right? Hitting in combat, right? Making those tokens, spreading more counters around. Obviously, I think more than anything, we want to put them on Tiny, right? It has trample. So I'm thinking Plains, Rosie. Rosie makes a food. Rosie's go off. I'm going to put it on Tiny. Now, my next thought was to put down Garrick's Uprising, but if Tiny can already hit somebody in combat, I think I'd rather just let us make the food and the clue, and then get a couple more counters on Tiny, right, with Rosy Cotton, and then put this Garrick's Uprising down main 2, since it was probably, I guess Sophia could have attacked, but of course, not being a dog, we're not going to get the trigger. And now we're in good shape, right? Rosie's going to really start hopefully making us some key amounts of things. Remember, I can't put a counter on Rosie with its own ability, so I would need something like Requisition Raid to protect it from Wave Goodbye. But that is an option. I could Requisition Raid and then Wave Goodbye if I wanted to this turn. I was gonna say I don't have any other dogs. I could try to dig, if I want to. That eliminates that line if that's what I want to do. Put a counter on everything and then Wave Goodbye. Right, it would pretty much guarantee Tiny hitting in this turn and some other attacks, but maybe it's too early in the game to do that. But my thought is, my thought there is then you guarantee you're going to guarantee 3 hits this turn, although right only one of them's from a dog. But again, you could start growing Sophia too. It's not like all of Rosie's counters have to go on Tiny. I just think Tiny's the best option for it. And then as we come into our next turn, I think we got to kind of start digging, right? Try to find some things. I'll crack the clue. Sphere Good is great. That is great, right? That's exactly what we want to see. So now all of our creatures have trample, right? I almost want to just crack the food again, or crack the clue again to draw more, right? But, you could also make the argument about Nature's Lore. crack a clue again to draw. That's, again, such the nice thing about the clues. We see Renoa, who comes in and makes that legendary dog token. Again, go to combat. So all three of these have trample. So Sophia and Tiny, great attacks this turn. Got trample twice, right? Number when they hit, they get a counter on them because of Sphere Grid. We're guaranteed to make that, right? We're guaranteed to make that food and clue. I think I'll just split the tokens between them, making Sophia a threat as well. And then I do think we have enough mana to proc Sophia one more time, but I think I'd probably just wait. And then coming into the next turn, well, Unbreakable Formation's pretty fun. Can give them all trample, and or vigilance, and a counter on them and indestructible. That's pretty fun. If I go Renoa, she makes Angelo, right? Which is going to trigger Rosie Cotton. I'll just put the counter on her just to keep her safe. And then whenever she attacks, if another her creature gets +1/+1 for each creature you control. Again, great on something like Tiny, right? But I've got 3 enough mana. My thought is just Unbreakable Formation. And then you're just putting a counter on each creature we control. They all get Vigilance. Trample because of a... Sorry, Galaxy Uprising. I'm going to draw us a card off of Renoa coming in. I think it's just take the attacks, right? Make a bunch of foods, put some more counters on, and I think we're in a similar spot, right? Just trying to amass that value on board. Let's go one more playtest here. Keeping a 4-lander again, Ripples, Spirited Companion for some draw. Works great with something like Felia, right? To blanket running draw again, and then the Requisition Raid. Kind of like the idea of trying to get some of these dogs in before Sophia, to have a nice board of dogs right to get down. Mushroom Dog here. I think we just get Sophia and make Tiny. Again, trying to find that, get that board state of dogs built up to get onto. 5 mana now. I can get into the Arcane Signet. If I do that, we could like Requisition Raid. It would come down to how many of my opponents are like wide open. Like if I have an attack where I can get multiple dogs in, my thought is like Arcane Signet plus the Sweet Revenge, because that gives me a food. And then I go to combat, and if multiple of those dogs can hit, right, that's a couple foods and a couple clues. And then now, right, those foods can now tap for green, right? So we have access to just more mana. We could even, tap those foods to sack a clue. We could tap the foods to pay for Sophia's, right, counters, which doesn't feel bad to me either, right? Just getting rid of the clues to go a counter deep on all of our creatures. And then coming back to our next turn, again, these can still tap for green, right? So we've still got access to them. So you've got 7, 8, 9, 10 mana, lots of mana. Love the idea of a Unbreakable Formation just to go, right? Go in for some big damage this turn. We got the Requisition Raid to continue to spread some counters, but can also lock down our opponents. I don't know that I want to crack the Sweet's Revenge this turn, just because I don't know if there's enough on the bone just quite yet. Lonus could help pass out some counters. Let's see, if I do Unbreakable Formation main 1, everybody gets a counter in Vigilance. I could Rec Raid, but I've got, 4, 7 mana left? I guess probably get Lonus in first, right, would make the more sense, and then I would get to Investigate and make the clue. 3, 6, 4 mana left, including that. I think I'd leave it up for the Ripples, right? Going and attacking again. With Trample on Tiny, I think it's pretty guaranteed to hit. Question is anything else guaranteed to hit? I guess that just depends on what's out there. Mushroom being a 5/5 doesn't seem bad. Spirit's a 4/4. I mean, they may have a chance, just depending. Let's say, a combination of 2 of them hit. And then, pass it. We have the Ripples to protect all of our creatures. They all have counters on them. If my opponent doesn't do anything, I think I just tap the foods to sack the clues to put counters on all of our dogs, and just grow them for the next turn. and just try to, maybe look into a Knight of Sweets Revenge for some big damage. Remember that Knight of Sweets does have to get activated at sorcery speeds. We do kind of got to know what we're doing. But remember, the nice thing about Sweets is, um, we got 5 foods to pay for it, right? And it's only going to get better and better. But I'd love to know, what do you think of Sophia down in the comment section below? I think it's a really interesting deck. I think it's a deck that's going to get just more love over time. Remember, every time we get either new dogs, you get new food support or new clue support. There's really honest questions about what you want to add to the deck, and I think that's what sometimes you want to think about when you're building your deck is, what new cards could come out. I mean, I think this deck got so much support in things like Sphere Grid, and it's only going to get better over time. But I'd love to know, what do you think of Sophia and I? We'll catch you on the next one.